Bonjour les amis et bienvenue à Amboise. Welcome to Amboise in the heart of the Loire Valley. It's a bit overcast today, but I am here in town and I thought I would stop by to show you something that has been attracted crowds since it reopened a few weeks ago in June, and that is this magnificent chapel right in front of me, Saint Hubert Chapel. As you probably know, this is the place where Leonardo da Vinci is buried, and it sits right in the heart of a magnificent chateau, le Chateau Royal d'Amboise, Royal Palace of Amboise, of what's left of it, since it's only about 1/5 of its former size, but it still remains a pretty impressive place with glorious views on the town and also on the Loire River down below. It's still early, it's about 10 in the morning, and you can see the town is waking up. This is the main street lined with restaurants, cafes, and if you follow the street past the chapel all the way up, you would reach Leonardo da Vinci's former residence, known as the Clos Lucé, which you can probably see to the right of the chapel right now. This is where he spent the last 3 years of his life. This is the town where he passed away. The sun's coming out, which is perfect. So when we talk about the Château d'Amboise, of course, there aren't that many buildings left. In fact, those two buildings are the main ones, and we've got a picture of this place. 1/5 of its former size. Imagine how many more buildings were here. Those two wings date back to the 15th, late 15th and 16th century. The one on the left was built by a famous king in these parts, Charles VIII, a king who was born and died in this chateau. You may have heard of his accidental death when he hit his head on a door on his way to a game with his wife, Anne of Brittany. And the wing facing us was added later in the 16th century by one of the great Renaissance kings in France, known as Francis I, François Ier, who built, among other places, builder king. He built the Château de Chambord, the mightiest of them all. You can see the flags. You have the fleur-de-lis, the royal symbol. And on the white flags, a reminder that Anne of Brittany was Queen of France twice, since she married Charles VIII, and after he died accidentally, his cousin, who ruled as Louis XII. And this is, of course, this looks really familiar if you've been to Brittany. It's not quite like the Breton flag, but it does remind you of it. I'm going to stand over here so you can see the Loire River as well. The crowds are starting to arrive. It's going to be a sunny day in the end. And Amboise is an extremely popular town in the Loire Valley. It's very crowded in the summer. Here is one of the towers that still surround the chateau. This one is called the Garçonnet Tower. And I'm standing right on top of it now. But this is why I came up here for. The Loire, the mighty Loire, the longest river in France, that crosses all of this glorious region, the Loire Valley, and once brought a lot of prosperity to this region, since a lot of trade was done on the river. You can hear the sound of gardeners down below. And here's a nice view of the chateau from the side. You can also see this big tower, La Tour des Minimes. It's one of two Cavalier towers that were added. Charles VIII, the one I mentioned earlier, did have that tower built. It wasn't really for defensive purposes. It was meant to be an entrance inside the chateau. And the reason we call them Cavalier towers is because you used to be able to go up, come up here, still riding your horse or in a carriage. There's another one, which is where visitors exit, called the Chateau Tower. But quite a striking architectural feature. So even though the fortifications were destroyed in the early 17th century by a gentleman named Richelieu, even though more destruction was organized in the early 1800s during the First Empire when Napoleon ruled. And even though a lot of the buildings are now gone, they would have been surrounding us, we can still get a feel for how mighty this chateau was. A chateau where kings were born or died, like Charles VIII. A chateau where royal children were raised. For example, the children of Catherine de' Medici and her husband, Henry II. They were raised here in the Château d'Amboise. Francis I himself, the great Renaissance king, arrived here with his sister when he was very young and grew up in the chateau. The gardens are quite spectacular, and it's good to remind folks that of the fact that the gardens were designed by Charles VIII as well back in the day. Of course, they've changed a lot now. We have themed gardens here, terraced gardens. They're quite pretty, and they sit over there in the back. The sun came out just in time for us to admire the incredible work that has been done over the last almost 3 years by some of the top craftsmen in France at this chapel, Saint Hubert Chapel, where allegedly Leonardo da Vinci is buried. Like I said, he spent the last 3 years of his life here. He was invited by Francis I, who went to Italy to wage what we refer to as the Italian Wars that lasted for several decades through the 15th and 16th century. He invited Leonardo to come here. Francis I was a patron of the arts, and Leonardo came here, was given a pension, a beautiful home that we know today as the Clos Lucé. He didn't paint that much after he got here, but he became the king's main painter, architect, and engineer. And he organized, in the short time he lived here, he organized some incredible parties, we would say today, for the king. Let's try and get closer to the chapel now. It just reopened a few weeks ago, and this is a great example of what one can do when carving, when sculpting this beautiful cream-colored or white-colored limestone quarried in the Touraine region for centuries, which is known as the tuffeau or tufa stone. I'm going to get closer so you can admire it. The chapel was in need of a restoration. The entrance itself is spectacular. Look at the intricate detail. And right above the door here, you recognize Charles VIII and his wife, Anne of Brittany. Look at the incredible detail. I'm going to get a little closer. So picture this, for almost 3 years, they worked on all the friezes inside, the statues, and of course the stained glass windows. The stained glass windows were destroyed during World War II, and so an artist known as Max Ingrand, who's done a lot of stained glass work in the Loire Valley and beyond, did those windows, redid those windows in the 1950s, and those windows have just been taken down and completely restored. The light is glorious right now. You can see they have a modern take to them, modern feel. The colors are glorious, of course. They just put them back up. And look at the vault above my head. The altar of the chapel. And of course, the one everybody comes here to see, Leonardo da Vinci. People sometimes are surprised to find him here. They don't know the story. But this is his grave. I'm sure he's very happy to have the beautiful chapel restored right above his head. So much detail. And this, of course, is the flamboyant Gothic style. And you can see the chapel from down below all over town, and it's so clean and white now, it just sparkles. There's a tour going on outside, so I'm going to step away from here so I can tell you a little bit more. You're getting a private tour. What you see in front of us is the top of that second Cavalier Tower, the Chateau Tower, which is where you exit the chateau. And in front of us, no more buildings today, but glorious gardens that have been re-landscaped over time. Of course, the chateau has changed hands a lot. It is today property of the state. And the cost of the restoration of the chapel, Chapelle Saint Hubert, has been financed to a large extent, more than 60% by the French state. This is how you arrive. It's a little bit of a climb because you access the chateau through a ramp. No more drawbridge, but still a little bit of a climb. I'm going to stand over here so you can get a feel for the gardens. So again, the 16th century wing added by Francis I in the Renaissance style, and the one that came right before it, built by Charles VIII. Charles VIII is also the one who had this chapel built, Chapelle Saint Hubert. But the story is that there was another church here. There was another church, a collegial church. And when Leonardo died, this is the first place where he was buried. But that church was destroyed in the early 19th century. And it's only a few decades later, quite a few decades later, in the 1860s, they did some excavations and found what experts thought were Leonardo's remains. And so today you have this bust of Leonardo. I'm walking towards it now. This bust that was added to remind us of where the original burial place was. The church is long gone. And so in the late 19th century, once they found his remains, look at the lavender along this pathway, they decided to bury him here at St. Hubert Chapel. Quite a peaceful place. It's not too crowded right now. And if you come here, you can, once you're done visiting the chateau, you'll exit right there and you can visit the gardens, the terraced gardens, the themed gardens. There's a lot to see up here. And then the town of Amboise awaits down below with lovely restaurants and cafes, and you can always sample some local wines, of course. gardener going by. And look at that cedar of Lebanon over there. Massive tree, just beautiful. Those gardens, by the way, have a quality label known as Jardins Remarquables de France, Remarkable Gardens of France. I have one also in my city in Tours, where I've taken you to before. You can find that replay on my YouTube channel, the France with Vero YouTube channel. The garden is called le Jardin des Prébendes. Le Jardin des Prébendes. I hope you've enjoyed this tour today. Coucou. It's been my pleasure to show you the lovely, lovely Château d'Amboise and the Chapelle Saint Hubert, newly restored, just reopened. So if you come to Amboise, you'll be able to visit it. It's right here behind me. And if you can't, well, hopefully this video and the photos I'll be sharing online will enable you to appreciate it. I want to say a big thank you for following me today. Another virtual tour. You can find many, many more on the France with Vero YouTube channel. I'm also on social media. And if you'd like to support my small business and tip the tour guide, look at the video notes. All that information is down below. Merci les amis et à bientôt.